Have you ever been tested by your beliefs? When a famous professor, known for his sharp arguments, faced off against a determined student, what happened left the entire classroom stunned. It wasn't just a debate, it was a moment that changed everything. If this story made you think, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more meaningful content. Under the dim yellow lights of the lecture hall, Professor Edward Gregory entered the room, his cold eyes sweeping over the students flipping through their notebooks. He was used to this expectation, the tension he brought whenever he stood before his class. He was not an ordinary professor. He was someone who specialized in breaking down deeply held beliefs, a man who believed in nothing but reason and raw truth. Ava Mia sat in the middle row, quiet as usual. She wasn't the type to seek attention, but today, something different made her the center of attention, something she hadn't anticipated, a necklace with a cross glinting under the lights. Edward had noticed it the moment she entered. "Well, Miss Mia," his voice rang out, breaking the silence that enveloped the classroom. Ava looked up, her eyes calm but guarded. "Your necklace? Is it just jewelry, or does it actually mean something to you?" Ava gently grasped the cross with her fingers, feeling the cool metal against her skin. She had known this would happen. Everyone knew Gregory didn't like religion, didn't like what he called blind faith. But she wasn't afraid. "It means something," she replied, her tone steady yet firm. Edward sneered, crossing his arms, as if her answer had opened a door he'd long been waiting for. "What kind of meaning? Or do you just believe in it because it's been passed down to you?" The class held its breath. Everyone knew this was a familiar moment, when a student was pushed into a debate they couldn't win. But Ava didn't back down. "I wear it not because someone told me to," she said slowly, "but because it reminds me of who I am and where I come from." An unusual silence filled the room. Edward, who usually had a sharp rebuttal at the ready, paused this time. He looked at her, as if trying to find something in the calmness of her eyes. "So, if you lost it tomorrow, would anything in your life actually change?" Ava smiled softly. Because it's not just an object. Faith isn't in a necklace, it's in me." Unexpectedly, the silence lingered longer than usual. A few students exchanged glances, some lowered their heads, but everyone felt that something had shifted in the room. This was no longer just a debate. For the first time, Edward Gregory had no immediate response. And that was the moment everyone realized, perhaps this time, he wasn't the one who had won. The room fell into an oddly heavy silence as Ava Mia delivered her response. The other students seemed to be waiting for a reaction from Professor Edward Gregory, an incisive rebuttal, a bewildering question, or a sarcastic mockery. But he simply stood there, his deep eyes fixed on Ava with an intensity of observation that he didn't even realize he was giving. Ava remained calm, her hands instinctively brushing the cross at her neck, not because she felt the need to protect it, but because it had become a part of her, a memory, a belief that could not be taken away. Gregory cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. "You say faith isn't in a necklace. So tell me, where does it lie?" Ava closed her eyes for a brief moment, took a deep breath, then opened her eyes. "It lies in those who came before me, in the sacrifices they made for me to be here today. It lies in what I've seen, in the moments when I knew I wasn't alone, even when everything around me seemed to be against me." Her voice dropped, carrying a sincerity that thickened the air in the room. "So, you believe in things that can't be proven?" Gregory asked, trying to take back the initiative once again. Ava looked straight at him without hesitation. "And you believe that only what can be measured has value?" That question hit directly. Gregory faltered for a moment, but quickly masked it with a smirk. That's how we understand the world. Reason, logic, evidence. Without them, it's all just imagination. Ava tilted her head slightly, as if considering something very important. So, have you ever loved anyone, Professor? The air in the room froze. A few students glanced at one another, unsure if Ava's question was a provocation. But she didn't ask it with mockery, nor did she try to embarrass him. She simply posed a question. Gregory squinted but didn't answer right away. Can you measure love? Ava continued, her voice gentle but sharp. Weigh it? Calculate it by some formula? She paused before adding, or do you just know it's real because you felt it? A ripple of quiet whispers spread through the class. No one dared to breathe loudly. Gregory took a deep breath, his hand tightening around the pen he was holding. He didn't like being cornered. But this time, he couldn't immediately find a way to refute her. Ava didn't intend to belittle him. She just wanted him to understand that there were things more important than logic. Outside the window, the sun was starting to set, casting soft light across the lectern. Gregory exhaled, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time, a shift in the rigid belief he held. And for the first time, he wondered, maybe he was wrong. Ava sat up straight, her gaze unwavering as she faced Professor Edward Gregory. She was used to debates in this classroom, accustomed to the way he used logic to dismiss others' beliefs. But this time, the discussion was no longer a mere intellectual contest. It was about who she was, about the things she held most dear. Gregory slowly set his pen down, his face no longer wearing the usual smug expression. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed in front of his chest, as if trying to find a new perspective on the student before him. Miss Rhodes, he said, trying to maintain a calm tone, are you saying that love and faith are the same, both unprovable? Ava smiled slightly, a soft yet confident smile. No, I'm saying neither of them needs to be proven. You don't need someone to point out a mathematical formula for you to know that you love someone. You don't need statistics to confirm that love is real. You just feel it. Gregory blinked, a brief moment of hesitation flashing across his face. He had spent his entire career teaching students to question things, but never had anyone made him question himself quite like this. So, what if one day you lose your faith? He asked, his voice slower than before. Ava paused for a moment, as if weighing her response. If I lose it, I'll find it again, she said, her voice steady. Because faith isn't just an abstract concept, it's a choice, and I choose to keep it, even when I can't see it clearly. The students around them seemed to hold their breath, feeling the weight of her words. They were no longer passive spectators in an intellectual debate. They were witnessing something deeper, something more genuine. Gregory placed his hands on the desk, staring at her intently. Aren't you afraid? Ava tilted her head, her expression calm. Afraid of what? That you might be wrong, that everything you believe in could be an illusion? She thought for a moment before answering. Anyone can be wrong, Professor. But fear isn't a reason to give up what's important to you. If I gave up my faith just because I might be wrong, then that wouldn't be faith, would it? Gregory stiffened, her words lingering in his mind longer than he had expected. This wasn't the first time he had challenged a student's beliefs, but this time he wasn't sure who was truly being tested. Ava sat quietly for a few seconds, letting Gregory's words hang in the air. She didn't rush to respond, didn't try to counter his argument right away. Instead, she observed his expression. His confidence seemed to waver just for a moment. There's one thing I've always believed, Professor, Ava said slowly, her voice low but firm. Faith isn't just something we hold on to. Sometimes it's faith that holds on to us. Gregory raised an eyebrow, but he didn't interrupt her as he usually did with other students. Ava continued, her eyes scanning the faces around her, where a few students had stopped taking notes and were now just listening attentively. My grandmother used to tell me that when you feel like you're about to fall, when everything in life seems to be out of control, that's when you need to hold on to what truly matters. She gently touched the small cross on her necklace. My grandmother went through a lot. War, loss, years of being looked down upon and despised. But she never let go of her faith, even when the whole world wanted her to. The room grew eerily quiet. Even the students who often argued with Professor Gregory seemed captivated by Ava's story. Gregory crossed his arms, but this time his expression was no longer smug. He was listening, really listening. And you know what? Ava tilted her head, her eyes glowing with warmth but determination. I think sometimes people don't give up their faith because they think it's not real. They give it up because they're tired, because this world makes them believe that faith is a sign of weakness. Gregory didn't respond immediately. For a moment, he seemed to be pondering something deeper than the debate itself. But if someone as strong as your grandmother could hold on to her faith despite everything, he said slowly, then why do you need to protect it? Why not let it prove its value on its own? Ava smiled, a smile not of challenge, but of understanding. Because faith isn't something that exists to prove anything to anyone. It's what helps people keep moving forward, even when they're not sure what's ahead. That's why my grandmother could endure those tough years, and that's why I'm sitting here today. For a moment, Gregory said nothing. He just looked at Ava, then glanced down at his hands, as if searching for something he hadn't considered before. The classroom remained silent, but this silence wasn't waiting for the next argument. It was a silence of respect. An understanding was beginning to form, even if just a little. And in that moment, Professor Gregory realized that perhaps, for the first time in many years, he had encountered a student who wasn't just here to learn from him, but who could also teach him something. She knew full well that he was waiting for her to be flustered, for her to stammer out uncertain answers, like so many other students he had faced throughout his teaching career. But this time, that didn't happen. She could feel the expectation in the room, the curious eyes focused on her, waiting to see if she would crumble under the pressure of this strong man. Every word that Gregory spoke carried weight, but Ava, though she couldn't deny the tension in her chest, didn't feel fear. She knew this wasn't just a debate about belief. It was a test of inner strength. Gregory's voice broke the silence, full of arrogance as usual. So, Ava, if your faith is really as strong as you say, why can't anyone prove it? Why do you need something as small as this cross to feel empowered? Ava took a deep breath, not rushing to answer immediately. She could feel the doubt in every question he asked, but instead of reacting with strong rebuttals, she chose to listen, letting Gregory's words settle in her mind. She knew this wasn't the time for logic to win. It was the time for emotion, for true connection, to speak. "Professor," she began, her voice soft but firm, "you might say that the cross is just a piece of metal, but to me, it's everything. It's not just a decoration or a symbol of faith. It's a connection to my grandmother, who has passed. It reminds me that no matter how hard life gets, I can stand firm because I know I'm not alone. My faith doesn't need to be proven to anyone other than myself." Gregory's eyes widened slightly, and his expression shifted, no longer carrying the arrogance from before. The room fell silent, and Ava felt the change in the air. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about understanding, about a deep connection between her and everyone who was listening. Faith isn't something that can be explained through theory or logic, Ava continued, her gaze locking with Gregory's. It's what helps us stand up when everything around us crumbles. It's what helps me get through each day without fearing what might happen. The whole room seemed to stop breathing, and Ava realized that she wasn't just defending her own faith, but the faith of everyone who had ever faced doubt, discrimination, and life's challenges. She knew that right here, right now, she had truly connected with them, with those who didn't need a reason to believe, because belief itself was enough. Gregory stood still, saying nothing, but in his eyes, there was a noticeable change. It wasn't surprise or defeat, but a deep understanding, a connection that he couldn't deny. Ava stood firm, feeling the tension in the air, her hands gripping the cross that her grandmother had given her in her final days. That feeling, which seemed to fade with each sharp question from Gregory, was not just a test of her intellect, but of her faith. She didn't want to show weakness, but in that moment, the nervousness enveloped her. Every eye in the room was on her, waiting for her next move. She couldn't deny that Gregory's words carried a challenge, as if he were trying to dig into the wounds she had worked so hard to hide. Every question he asked seemed designed to weaken her faith, to see if she would crumble under the pressure, but Ava knew that this wasn't just about her faith. It was a part of the long journey her grandmother had taken, and the lives of those like her who had fought for what they believed in, even when the world around them criticized them. "Do you think my faith is just blind belief?" Ava asked, her voice calm but firm. She looked Gregory in the eye, not a trace of confusion in her gaze. Though she knew Gregory wouldn't easily let go of his game, she also noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The students around her began to stop focusing on the professor's difficult questions. They were silent, not out of fear, but because of the sincerity in Ava's words. "That's what has helped me get through the hardest moments," she continued, each word a firm declaration. "When I wear this cross, I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone. It's a reminder that no matter how difficult life gets, I can still hold on to my faith and stand tall." These words were not just theory. They came from a deep place within her. They were part of her life, built from the times her grandmother had held her in the dark nights when everything around her seemed to fall apart. Ava didn't need to explain further. Those who understood would understand, and those who didn't would never truly get it. But in this moment, she noticed the change in the eyes of some of the students. They no longer looked at her with ridicule, but with understanding, with respect. Gregory, who had always prided himself on controlling every situation, stood silent, his gaze showing a hint of hesitation. The questions he still wanted to throw at her, like stones, were now useless. This time, he couldn't hurt her anymore. Ava didn't need to win him in a theoretical debate. She had earned his respect with her own faith. The entire class was silent, and Ava realized that she wasn't just standing up for herself, but for those who had ever felt forgotten, judged for their beliefs. And that connection, though unspoken, was powerful enough to change everything. Each question from Gregory was not just a challenge to her intellect, but a piercing jab at the deep faith within her. Throughout her life, Ava had learned to face judgment, criticism, but now, standing before Gregory, a man she had once respected, all that confidence seemed to waver. Gregory's words echoed, sharp as a knife, unforgiving. "That cross," he said, "is ultimately just a blind symbol of vague belief. If it were gone, would anything change?" It wasn't the first time she had heard that question, but this time it tightened her chest. How could she explain something that even she couldn't define clearly? Faith, to her, wasn't something that could be measured or proven with logic. It was a part of her, tied to every moment in her life, to the struggles and challenges her grandmother had overcome. The feeling of nervousness made Ava's heart beat faster. Everyone around her was watching closely, waiting for her response. But Ava couldn't let that nervousness make her back down. It was hard to put into words everything she felt, but she knew this was the most important moment in her life. "You can say it's just metal," she replied, her voice steady but certain. "But to me, it's a connection to those who came before me, to those who lived and died for that faith. It's a part of me, not just a material object, but a legacy." The light in the room seemed to dim, as though the entire space was pausing. Gregory didn't say anything more, but Ava could feel a shift in his gaze. It seemed like he was starting to realize that this wasn't a debate he could easily win. She didn't need to prove her faith with theory. She just needed to live it, let it guide her through the challenges ahead. Then a voice came from behind, surprising Ava. A student who had been quiet throughout the class spoke up. "I used to have a necklace like that. It was my mother's. I don't know why, but when I don't have it, I feel like a part of me is missing." A few eyes turned to each other, nodding gently, exchanging looks of understanding. It was a connection that didn't need words. Ava looked at Gregory once more, but this time there was no doubt in her eyes. "We don't have to understand everything," she said, "but we need to respect what makes us strong." Her words rang out clearly, not just as a response, but as a declaration of her unwavering faith and strength. And in that moment, Ava realized she wasn't standing alone. She had connected with those who shared her faith, her strength in life. No matter how sharp Gregory's words were, they couldn't separate her from what she believed in, and all that remained was respect, not just from him, but from the people around her, who were now listening to her story with understanding. The entire room seemed to fall silent, with only her breathing and the unwavering gazes upon her. Gregory, the man who had once been a symbol of reason and analysis, now found himself unable to shatter the deep faith she carried within her. Every word he spoke, each sentence, seemed designed to undermine the values she had been raised with, values that were not merely theoretical, but experiences and memories she had lived through. When he mentioned the cross, a simple symbol she always wore around her neck, she knew immediately he wouldn't stop. "Does this cross really do anything?" Gregory asked, his voice low, sharp as a razor. A question not meant to challenge her intellect, but to challenge her faith, the faith she placed in each day she lived. She had heard these questions before, but this time everything felt different. Gregory wasn't just trying to challenge her reason. He was attempting to prove that what she believed in was meaningless. Ava felt her heart beat faster. She couldn't ignore these questions. She knew he wouldn't understand, but she also knew that life wasn't just a series of empty theories. She looked down at the cross, her hand gently brushing over its smooth surface. It had been with her entire life, through every high and low, through sleepless nights when her grandmother was in the hospital, through the moments when her mother held her tight during the darkest days. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a part of her, an irreplaceable part. "It belonged to my grandmother," Ava began, her voice calm, but the emotion behind her words made the entire class fall silent. "She gave it to me the night before she passed away. It reminds me of my family, my history, of everything that helped me stand firm during my toughest moments." She paused, took a deep breath. These words weren't just for Gregory, but for herself, to affirm that her faith could never be taken away. No matter how the world changes, no matter how much criticism there may be, I still believe in its value. Her words were not just a defense of her own faith, but a connection with those who came before her, with the generations that had laid a strong foundation for her. The eyes of those around her began to shift, not with judgment or criticism, but with understanding, a deep sense of connection from within them. People began to realize that not everything in life could be explained through reasoning or logic. There were things beyond all concepts, things like love, faith, and connections we can't see, but always feel. Gregory looked at her, his gaze no longer sharp. In that moment, Ava felt something change in him, a respect, an unspoken acknowledgement that sometimes strength doesn't lie in dismissing or breaking someone else's faith, but in accepting and respecting their differences. And for Ava, she knew she didn't have to prove she was right. She only needed to live with what she believed in, and no one could take that faith from her. Ava could feel the tension in the air, the weight of all eyes on her. The classroom, which was usually a place where people could freely express their thoughts, had turned into a stage today, where every word she spoke was being judged, every thought dissected. Gregory, the man who had taught generations of students how to question everything, now stood across from her, his eyes full of curiosity and challenge. Ava knew he was trying to make her doubt herself, trying to shake her confidence in the beliefs she had built over her entire life, but she couldn't let herself waver. The nervousness surged, but deep inside, her faith remained unshaken. She had always believed that there were things that could not be explained by reason, and the cross she wore was proof of that. It wasn't just a meaningless piece of jewelry, it was a part of her family's history, and a reminder of the values her grandmother had taught her. A sense of regret filled Ava as she realized that, no matter how many times Gregory asked, he would never understand the deep meaning of that cross. He would never understand the dark nights when faith was the only thing that kept her standing, when everything around her seemed to fall apart. But Ava also knew that understanding didn't always come from explaining the reasons behind things. Sometimes it came from accepting differences and respecting what others believed in. Her hope began to grow as she realized she wasn't alone. The students around her, who had been following the debate, started to see things differently. The doubtful glances slowly turned into understanding. A few of them nodded gently, giving her looks of support. The atmosphere in the room began to change. The air, the light, even the sound of everyone's breathing seemed to become lighter. Ava felt a deep connection with those around her, those who had come to realize that truth isn't always something you can prove with logic, but something you feel deep inside. The moment erupted when a student stood up and softly said, "My grandmother used to say the same thing." Her words spread, connecting everyone together. Not only Ava, but others in the class began to share their own stories about faith, about the priceless things they kept close to their hearts. And in that moment, Ava realized that not everyone needed to win this debate. What mattered was mutual respect and understanding, that we all have our own values, and no one can change that. Ava smiled softly. She didn't need to prove anything. She just needed to live with her faith, and that was enough. Ava could feel the tension in the air. All eyes were on her, and she knew that today wasn't just any ordinary debate. Gregory, the man she had always respected, was now the one making her feel as though she were being pushed to her limits. The people around her were starting to pay attention, and a wave of nervousness washed over her. She looked at Gregory. His eyes seemed to be waiting for an answer he had already prepared. But Ava knew this wasn't about proving who was right or wrong. She wasn't someone who cared about winning this debate. She just wanted to hold on to her beliefs. The simple cross she wore around her neck had now become the focal point of all the attention. A sense of regret crept into her thoughts. Was her faith just a meaningless accessory? Were all the lessons she had learned from her grandmother, from those who came before her, just fairy tales with no foundation? These questions echoed in her mind, but she refused to let them shake her, because she knew Faith wasn't something that could be proven by reason or logic. Sometimes it was simply what you felt in your heart, the thing that kept you standing when everything around you seemed to fall apart. And then, hope began to rise as she saw the expressions around her starting to change. The students who had once been doubtful began to fall silent, listening, not because they agreed with her, but because they started to understand that trust doesn't always need to be explained. She saw a connection, a quiet but powerful understanding begin to form in the room. They were no longer just individuals in a debate. They were people with different stories and beliefs, and all of them deserved respect. And then, something unexpected happened. A student stood up, softly but firmly saying, "My grandmother used to say the same thing." Those words, gentle yet powerful, brought a shift in the atmosphere. The entire class began to open up, some even unable to hold back their emotions. Love, affection, and connection had surpassed all logic and theories. This was no longer about winning or losing. It was about mutual understanding. Ava felt a weight lift from her heart. She didn't need to fight. She just needed to stand firm in her faith. And even if Gregory didn't acknowledge it, she knew that today, the whole class had learned a valuable lesson about respect and empathy. Through this story, we learned that faith and respect don't always come from convincing others that we are right. Sometimes, strength isn't in proving something, but in holding on to your beliefs, even when faced with doubt. Ava didn't need to explain or refute Gregory. Instead, she chose to live with her faith, and this created a profound shift in how those around her saw things. The greatest lesson here is respecting differences and understanding that everyone has their own stories, experiences, and beliefs. We don't need to win every debate. We need to learn how to listen and respect others, even when their beliefs differ from ours. That's how we create connection, empathy, and true change in this world. Thank you for watching. If you found this video interesting or enjoyable, please show your support by giving it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and reach more amazing viewers like you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our future uploads. Your support means the world to us and keeps us motivated to create even better content for you.